Welcome everybody to another episode of Need Some Introduction. I'm your host, Victor, and on this podcast we go week to week, watching something on television, breaking it down, and providing some context and some recommendations along the way. In today's episode of the podcast, I'll be breaking down the latest episode of Pluribus, an episode called The Gap. Due to my work schedule and Sona's work schedule, I will not have a co-host for today's episode, but can't wait to get her opinion of the current episode. And I'm sure we'll have a conversation about it in next week's coverage. Between then and now, also expect an episode in which Darren and I discuss the season finale of Welcome to Derry, but primarily in that episode we'll be discussing the new Knives Out sequel, Wake Up Dead Man, which is just available today on Netflix, but has been playing in theaters for a few weeks now, and we'll be discussing that in great detail in the next episode. Also next week, Fallout premieres, the first episode of Amazon Prime's very successful video game adaptation. And we'll be covering that show week to week throughout the holidays and then integrating that into other shows we'll be covering as well. The Pit is premiering. A second season of The Night Manager is coming to Amazon Prime. Darren and I will be discussing Industry, Season 4, I believe the final season of that HBO series. And Sona and I will be going week to week discussing Hijack as well, the Apple TV Plus thriller starring Idris Elba, I should say. And of course, in the meantime, the holidays are coming. It's also the end of the year, and I'll be counting down my top 20, 30, 40, maybe 40 films of the year and my TV shows, a much shorter list of television shows, mostly what we've covered here in the podcast. And I'll try to bring in some guests for those conversations as well. So if you'd like to be notified when those episodes become available, make sure you subscribe so you know when those episodes drop. And of course, if you'd like to support us, recommend us to your friends and family, binge us on a long car ride, check out our back catalog for other episodes you might have enjoyed or might have missed along the way, maybe some shows you've been catching up on, and give us an Apple podcast review or Spotify review or whatever podcatcher of choice you happen to be listening to us on. And of course, reach out to us. Sona, I do as well, but Sona loves getting your emails, particularly. Or reach out to us with a comment on our YouTube channel, or if you're listening to us on Spotify, just post a comment under the episode. Our email address is needssomeintroduction@gmail.com. Okay, a couple of things about last week's episode. First of all, Alan, frequent emailer Alan, thank you for all your emails, pointed out that Sona mentioned the plane crash in the movie Alive, also in a really interesting, excellent Academy Award nominated film from about 2 years ago, I believe 2 years ago, Society of the Snow, which is still available on Netflix. A huge hit on Netflix, I think one of the highest rated, or the most viewed, I should say, foreign language film in the history of Netflix. Anyway, in relationship to being completely utilitarian about some corpses that happened to be around, Sona misspoke and said that the plane crash was in the Alps, and I seconded that in the conversation, but in my mind, I thought we had said Andes. But of course, it's in the Andes, and of course, may be confusing if you've seen the movie Alive, which has this all-American cast. But of course, in the J.A. Bayona film, Society of the Snow, the better film, by the way, of the two, better than Alive, although Alive is a good film also. Of course, this flight is coming from Uruguay, and the crash is in the Andes. They are not playing a soccer match in Europe. So that's our first mistake. The second one, of course, is like everybody else in Google Trends, according to Google Trends anyway, trying to calculate the driving distance from Paraguay to the United States. I had not even considered, honestly, the Darien Gap, which of course is the very gap, that is in the title of this episode of the show. And for those, of course, if you've seen this episode, you know that this, based on this very high level, almost Wikipedia-like dissertation on this region that connects South America to Central America, it is a dead zone, a 100-kilometer, extremely dangerous, with heat and severe humidity and dangerous venomous creatures and plants, all outlined here, of course, in this very episode of the show. And there actually is a ferry. This is all stuff I've discovered in the since then, but there is there used to be, at least, maybe not even currently anymore, a ferry that connects or circumvents it. But I was honestly shocked. Again, Alan was the one who pointed this out in an email. I was honestly shocked that, first of all, I have not thought about the Darien Gap since I was in high school, probably. And second of all, shocked to discover that still there is absolutely no convenient road or waterway to traverse this dead spot in the map. which honestly is shocking at this point in time. For me, anyways, shocking that this is still the case. And also shocking, I'll introduce this here, but I'll dig into it a little bit more because I think has something to do with what's being said here on the show. But the idea that this is the case, even though we know that tens of thousands, maybe multiple hundreds of thousands of people cross here on foot every single year through this very treacherous and dangerous isthmus, or what would you consider this connection between the two continents. It just speaks to the fact that people who are making this journey are taking their lives in their hands. And that's not just the case in this fictional show, but it is also the case in reality, in the real world. So how desperate must you be to endanger your lives through this crossing? So as the episode begins, Carol is returning from Las Vegas. She's about 150 miles outside of the city, heading towards New Mexico. This is about a nearly 600 mile drive, which is totally doable, especially traffic. By the way, traffic conditions fantastic on this drive. And she needs to stop and get some gas. I like all these little transgressions we see here in this first encounter at the gas station. Obviously, she can eat whatever she wants. She needs the gas station turned on again. She gets her usual voice recording and leaves her message. And some interesting details here. First of all, it's all the really petty ways she's trying to make a point here about her irritation. She wants a Gatorade, an ice cold Gatorade, not a tepid, not a lukewarm Gatorade, but it should be ice cold. And of course it is not. Although it looks pretty frosty, I have to say, from what I can see here. Do better next time, she says. But the logistics of this are pretty incredible. How quickly do they have an ice cold Gatorade that close by? I do wonder if we're compressing time here or if this is just taking some license to make this more entertaining to watch on TV. I'm sure as obsessed with process as Gilligan is, he probably would prefer to make us wait the entire 10 or 15 minutes to see the drone flying from the distance. It is interesting that all of this can be turned on remotely. Not sure if that would be the case for some mom and pop gas station, but again, making the point that so much of our world is now automated. The other thing I really enjoyed here is the fact that she starts scratching off these scratch-offs, and she actually wins $10,000, something that would be a real pleasure. Could you imagine scratching off a scratch-off, no matter how wealthy you are, and getting $10,000 on a scratch-off? How exciting. But again, as we've seen over and over again, all of these luxuries, all of these happenstances, all these pleasurable events do not have any kind of weight to them at all because Carol is alone. She has also bought all of the fireworks available in this gas station. And of course, she has not actually digressed too much on her return to New Mexico. Back to her home. She could stop anywhere she wants in the whole entire planet. She can go visit any place she's not been to before, but she goes back home. And we can tell from the timestamp that only hours have passed since, so she's pretty much made a straight line back from Las Vegas, back to New Mexico. And despite shooting off some fireworks and communing with the howling wolves, not quite the loner that she probably suspected herself to be or defined herself as. She's desperately lonely. And we saw that Mr. Diabate pretty clearly understood that loneliness that she was suffering under last week. But in denial, Carol is maybe taking a lesson from Diabate and finding her own type of pleasures to fill her time and trying to embrace the opportunities here and really just having the full-on fantasy world that we've seen explored in other TV series as well, like Last Man on Earth and other similar films as well. The idea that you have now this empty world and you can spend all the time catching up on all of the recreation that you wanted to when you were too busy to doing work or paying the bills or entertaining family to be able to indulge in any of them or all of them. But again, without company, how much fun is all of this? I have to say, I'm a bit of a loner, and in the same way that I'm now speaking to you, but doing so by being alone in my office right now, I would probably enjoy a lot of this. I would need people every once in a while, and more than that. So even I would get severely lonely. But as I mentioned, I think that Carol is maybe not the loner that she considers herself to be. And yet another irony of this circumstance that she's in, that she maybe gets what she's wanted this whole entire time, and it's absolutely not what she wants. She does golf. I like some of these details that these animals have now come back. This bunny and also this buffalo or bison, just wandering the golf course and singing to herself. How many different songs does she sing here to herself? I mean, I guess when you are alone enough, I talk to myself. I don't sing to myself. I definitely sing as well, but mostly talk to myself, as you would expect, given what I'm doing right now. Carol likes to sing, though. Of course, extremely apropos here on the golf course, she's singing this song from Caddyshack. And of course, earlier in the episode, she was singing along to the REM song, It's the End of the World as We Know It. And does she feel fine? I think Carol is not fine. Once she leaves the golf course, she actually has some car trouble with her police cruiser. And she decides, once again, to take a page from Mr. Diabate. And why not upgrade her ride? She has quite a few different ones she can choose from here, all impressive in their own ways. She goes with the Rolls Royce. I have not noticed this before. The retracting hood ornament, pretty cool. But I do call BS on these foil balloons. I mean, I got a load of those for my daughter's most recent birthday, and especially the foil balloons. The actual traditional balloons actually hold the helium for a few days, sometimes still floating around the house a week or so later. Those foil balloons are not very enthusiastic after a day or two, and within, I say 3 days, if you're lucky, they're sadly drooping and floating around the house. This is 12 days later. I don't know. These balloons do not seem to. They would be laying completely flat on the ground. I do like the visual, though, as she drives away, that they're kind of the one lowly one kind of floating in the background. So I do like the visual, although, like I said, these foil balloons don't hold their helium that long. I like how she picks appropriate music for each one of her activities. And when she stops at the Jaimez Springs, she takes off all her clothes and goes for a dip. And she has to sing Nelly's It's Getting Hot in Here. So take off all your clothes. And then I love this visit she makes to the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum in Santa Fe. And she sees a very famous painting, which I don't remember off the top of my head here, but one that she especially appreciates. She actually has a print of it in her house, and she's appreciating it. And then she's like, you know what? I'm just going to take this home with me. And I love the visual of her taking the print off the wall and replacing it with the actual painting. Beautiful. Oh, and of course she's singing Georgia on My Mind for Georgia O'Keeffe, because every one of her sing-alongs here is, which of course I think we do too as well, right? Like sometimes my daughter will say something, or you hear something, or someone will just get hooked in your head and then you're singing a song lyric that relates to that thing. Carol apparently operates exclusively in this mode. After admiring her new artwork, it's time for Carol to make a request. She's going to get dolled up tonight. She's going to paint the town red. All that food that she has not been partaking in. She wants some of her greatest hits at a fancy restaurant in her area, which I don't know, the specific restaurant. So she picks out the menu. No one's there. Again, they really want their distance from her. I wonder how quickly, I'm just thinking about the logistics of this, how quickly are they able to escape so they don't run into her, but yet the food, I assume, would be prepared to the correct temperature. This would be really important to them, I would presume. And of course, all the lights are on and the fire is lit. And I assume as soon as they know she's gone, a team of folks will come in and clean up after her. And she loves the food. It's exactly as she expected. Those crazy bastards indeed sure can cook. Carol, by the way, looks lovely here. She's fully done herself up, full makeup, a dress she would probably only wear to a very important public event. But hey, why not? It's an audience of one. Enjoy yourself, Carol. Oh, and of course, they have a player piano, and she gets to pick her song. And what song does she choose? I Will Survive. Carol will survive. That's how she feels at this moment. But she almost doesn't survive this episode. And then an incredible whiplash here, in an episode, by the way, which has hardly any dialogue at all, but incredible, beautiful visuals. We see that Manousos is repeating English phrases. We find out later on that he's been listening to some tapes that teach English to Spanish speakers, with a gasoline tank in his hand and a hose for siphoning. And Sona and I had speculated that there would probably be like preemptively just finding tanks of gasoline on the side of the road. And for all we know, considering his actions here, that may very well be the case. It is very possible that he has walked past full containers of gasoline, because we find out here that he refuses, until he cannot refuse, to take any assistance at all from these others. And of course, as we've mentioned many times here on the podcast, that Gilligan loves process. And just this visualization that he is walking up this hill, I think it's important that we're seeing him walk up this hill, looking for any gas to siphon off so he can walk all the way back to his car, put gasoline into it, and then drive it here again. And then there's some of maybe the longest sequence of dialogue. Actually, no, there's another one that's probably longer. But most of the dialogue here, or a big chunk of it here in the episode, where this very friendly, of course, one of these infected folks, hive mind member, very helpfully, very friendly. What an incredible casting of this character. Just such a lovely person, trying to be so helpful. And Manousos just refuses to even acknowledge him. They do have all this similar warnings, by the way. You don't want to lose more than 5% of your water, which is something that they also had a warning for Carol when she was digging up or trying to dig a hole for Helen's body, which again makes me think about the whole AI chatbot, hyper-friendly interactions we have with our chatbots. And once again, something that has to be context for this show. Even getting the same piece of advice over and over again, because that's very much like chatting with your chatbot. If you put in very similar circumstances, it obviously just reiterates an answer that's very similar to the one before, even without any understanding of the context from the previous conversation. It's just giving you the same helpful information over and over again, which is what would seem rational at that moment. But it has a lack of humanity to it. This actor, though, no lack of humanity here. This is the right person to try to get soften up Manousos, but Manousos is not going to be softened up. Oh, and of course, when he takes the gasoline, on top of everything else, he leaves money behind. There is still this thought that you can imagine in this circumstance. I mean, personally, me, even if I'm just trying to be as independent as possible, I'm not leaving any money behind. Even if these people all snap out of this, even if this thing runs out after 6 months and everybody starts to come back to themselves again, I'm going to be like, hey, whatever happened in the dark ages there, that between the before times and the after times, I am not going to go back and like pay you all back for the food of yours I ate or whatever. I'm like, look, I was just trying to figure it out. But Manousos, it once again speaks to the type of character he is, where he is not going to take anything. Even if these people don't appreciate that he's paying for it, he is still going to abide by the rules, even though, hey, guess what? Once he spends this money, no one else is going to give him more money, or they'll give him infinite money, but he'll reject it because he didn't earn it in his own mind. So there is a kind of absolutism, which is, in a way, self-defeating, to say the least, here for Manousos. But there's another question that's being asked, and I'm sure this is all where this whole show is going, is these different versions of being true to yourself in these kind of extraordinary circumstances, and none of them are really going to be right, because one size fits all for this type of circumstance is eventually going to break. It's not going to work for Diabate. It's not going to work for the other survivors. It's not going to work for Carol. And of course, Manousos also is like a real hardliner here, but I can't imagine this is going to be going to last very long, especially once he eventually collapses and needs to be rescued. But he, in this moment, still has some certainty, apparently, or belief, or she it appears to be, that things will go back to how they were. And then we have this prolonged and beautiful trip. We see him tracking on this map his progress as he continues up the coastline, works his way to the coastline and continues up the coastline of South America, driving through these towns, everybody kind of acknowledging him, of course, knowing exactly who he is. I love some of the details in the drive itself, not only the way the map is visualized, but this what the phrases he's learning and how they correlate to what we're seeing on screen. Especially the most relevant one, I think, is when we have this, the world is big. And yes, the world is so big. And he's traversing a significant chunk of it here. Oh, this beautiful car, by the way, is a midget. We see that from, I didn't know that until we actually see it center stage on one of the shots of the car driving down the highway. I love his license plate. It's a vanity plate called with El Fritz on it. So I guess that's what he calls himself, or is that his old nickname? And this car, lovingly maintained, This car manufactured back in the 60s and early 70s, I think. So not a contemporary car, a car that's easy to keep running for half a century since the end of its manufacture. So obviously lovingly maintained by Manousos, L. Fritz, which of course is very important because he then burns it when confronted with the option of leaving it behind, and very much the idea of cutting off your nose to spite your face. And he continues to practice his English. He continues to leave money behind as he's siphoning off this gasoline. He fishes for himself. I assume he's eating mostly fish. I think the only time we see him eating anything is fish. And this is presumably this trip, this 5,000-mile trip, although we're only seeing the first, not even 1,000. Maybe is it 1,000 miles between this leg of the trip? Maybe more than that. It's still taking multiple days. And then, of course, he arrives at the Durian Gap. And as soon as he arrives there, we get that imagery that, of course, reminds us of this being an immigration pathway, that all of these belongings have been left behind because it's too dangerous to try to make this perilous trip with excess baggage. And some others emerge from the woods and they tell him, please don't do this. We know you're going to go see Carol. We can get you there today. And this is true, right? They can probably get him to the local airport, get him on a plane directly to Albuquerque or to another plane in Mexico, and then put him on another plane that's waiting for him there, and boom. I mean, it could be just a few hours to get to Albuquerque in ideal circumstances. Not a few hours, I guess I'm exaggerating, probably like 6-7 hours, but still well under a day, one day, to get to Albuquerque. And instead, just crossing this dangerous terrain is going to take him at least a day. And I mean, he probably will need to take multiple breaks. So this thing is going to drag on for multiple days in this incredibly difficult, I'm sure he doesn't have food, because I'm sure he wouldn't even choose to steal food from the convenience stores he's been passing this whole way. Again, this true ideological commitment to his beliefs is literally going to get him killed. And he would fail his mission. So I'm very interested, very intrigued in knowing a few things. What happens next, basically, to this character? Because is he going to remain, even after having to, just the simple fact of necessity, having to accept the help from these others to survive this trip? And will it soften him in some ways? Would he come out of it even more committed to his mindset? And is that in some ways self-defeating? Will he learn something from this? And most importantly, when he meets up with Carol, if they have very different philosophies on how to deal with this circumstance, what is that internal dynamic going to be like? But of course, as I mentioned, these others come out of the woods. Don't do this. This is 100 kilometers. There are no trails. 38 degrees Celsius is almost 100 degrees Fahrenheit for us Americans. It's very humid. There's little clean water. There are poisonous trees. There are venomous snakes. There are venomous insects. You can get infections. There's limited food. We can get you to Carol, and we can even take your beautiful car with you. I know how much you love it. And he burns the car. He tells him, you cannot give me anything because all that you have is stolen. You don't belong here. I'm a little surprised, by the way, as direct, maybe because he didn't get in their face and start yelling at them, that this didn't immediately kill millions of people around the world. And then he heads out on this hike, this 100-kilometer hike. Jesus. With this, having learned this phrase in English that he's been preparing himself for. And this is his mantra, literally his mantra that he repeats over and over to himself. My name is Manousos Oviedo. I am not one of them. I wish to save the world. And we literally just see this actor, Carlos Manuel Vesga is the name of the actor, doing an incredible job here, by the way, of defining this character just purely through his actions and just repeating this to himself over and over again as he literally encounters every single thing that he's been warned about up until this point. And there's this hilarious and terrifying sequence where he's coming out from the woods with his machete, cuts away some leaves, and takes a step almost directly into one of these trees. A tree, I didn't know anything about these trees, by the way. The spiked chunga palm tree. I wonder what is up with this defensive. Like, what's feeding on these trees that it needs this kind of level of self-defense? Anyway, he sneaks past a couple of these trees. He's just working his way past them. And there's this great moment where he's starting to get delirious, probably dehydrated. And he steps on a rock and it rolls backwards. And as he's losing his balance, he tries to grab onto this vine, which just immediately comes off of the tree. And he falls right back, oh my God, directly into these spikes, right into his back. And they've even warned him that, this could be bacteria that can, he's got to be, if this is true, that there's bacteria growing on these spikes, he has put that deep into his skin. He is almost certainly going to die. And he's just bleeding as well, by the way, from these wounds. And that night he does a whole Rambo where he's sitting by the fireside and heating up his machete and trying to cauterize these wounds in his back. It's horrible. This guy's just in the worst situation. Oh, and by the way, so let's just take a minute here to explore this idea that we are seeing Carol at the end of her rope, and she's like sitting in the lap of luxury, going to golf courses, having fun, and, on the surface, clearly, just to be clear about that, eating her favorite meals that she's ever eaten in her life, literally in a depressive state, in the empty luxury that she is surrounded by, intercut with Manousos, who has nothing, not barely a bite to eat, and with spikes embedded in his back, and it's just such an incredible duality here of experience. And eventually, due to dehydration, due to fatigue, due to this infection spreading, Manousos collapses in the woods. And then importantly, he's laying on the ground and he waves his hand, but it's very ambiguous. Is he blocking the sun? Is he waving at them? Because importantly, earlier on, they say, all you have to do is look up in the sky and wave. And I guess they have a drone following him around and will come and help you out. Honestly, at this point, I think they were going to intercede regardless of whether they got a signal for him or not, because they simply can't help but see someone who's about to die and not take action. But the others have come to the rescue. And then we jump back to Albuquerque and Carol. But it is 35 days later. This is really interesting. In my head, I'm thinking Manousos recovers. He gets pissed off at the others. He makes his escape. I'm not sure exactly what his plan would be, but 35 days is a very long time, because I assume the others are going to would have gotten him close to Carol. I don't think they would have just kept him where he was, unless maybe they took him all the way back. No, they wouldn't have taken him back. I think they would have taken him closer to Carol, because that's what his desire was. So they would just assume that anyway, take him to a hospital where he would recover. But I don't think he'd be in recovery for 35 days. So he has got to have been out. I think that him being the way he is, the second that he was strong enough to get out of there, he would. So what has he been doing for all this time? Maybe he was in a coma. Who knows? Right? So maybe it could be something as simple as that. But very curious to know, what has Manousos been up to in the 35 days since we left him before? Carol, meanwhile, has been, golfing, not on the golf course, but off of buildings and shattering windows nearby. By the way, second time I'm going to call BS on this episode. These office buildings, these windows can take bird strikes. They are not getting broken by a golf ball. But it's a cool visual. You got another thing coming, by the way, is playing on our portable Walkman, or I should say CD player. And then most importantly of all, she's been setting off these fireworks. She tries to set them up in a way where they'll all go off at around the same time. Very cool visual. This is that night after the golfing events. And then the biggest one is aimed at her chair. Now, I don't know if it fell over and she simply did not take action. So I'm not sure if she's like, the coup de grace here is going to be that this thing is going to kill her, and that's how she literally has aimed it at her own head. Or if this just happened to topple over when she was tying the strings together and she's just looking at it going like, I don't care anymore. And then incredibly, by the way, she just kind of accepts the fact that she's going to die. And the rocket goes right past her hair. I love this shot, the visualization that it just kind of just moves her hair and then goes right into the house, sets the garage on fire. Pretty hilarious and terrifying at the same time. And she accepts the fact that she did not die and puts out the fire. And the next day she goes to the local home center to buy a giant container of white paint. I thought she was going to paint the house because maybe there was some fire damage, but no, that's not what she's doing. She's painting a giant message in the middle of the street. And very intentionally, I think that she's writing, we see her aggressively writing the letter K, and we're like, oh, I know what she's writing. She's saying F-U-C-K to these people out there, but that is not at all what she's writing. She says, please come back. And Zosha shows up and she collapses into her arms. Before that happens, by the way, she is sitting there. It's very interesting. I'm trying to like almost read what is going through her mind. Very curious. She's sitting there watching, admiring the Georgia O'Keeffe painting on the wall, and really does seem to look at it intently and really appreciate it. So even in her moment of despondency, there does seem to be something that she appreciates here, just the beauty of the painting. And maybe thinking that this is as good as it's going to get for her because she's been this lonely for this long. And then, of course, her beautiful reunion with Zosha, which is incredibly powerful because, again, you think about someone who's been so committed to her belief system, but just the simple reality that she needs companionship. And like we all need companionship in the end, no matter how much we think we want to be alone. At some point, eventually, we all crave contact and camaraderie. And of course, Zosha very warmly embracing her. And of course, there's this love that this entity has for these others. But we know that, again, being very committed to their own philosophies in the way that Manousos, being over committed to his ideology, nearly got him killed. These folks are going to be overly committed to their ideology, even if they can't help it, considering it might be some kind of programming that they have, we know is also eventually going to kill most of them off as well. And that's the end of the episode. Okay, so many things to consider next week. I touched on this last week when Sona and I were discussing the last week's episode in Vegas, but I think, and maybe this is just the way Carol is in her own personality, that there is an idea that you catch more bees with honey, that if she was just interacting with this entity and learning about it, it might be the better way to undermine it eventually. And I do think that that process, that very process, is going to begin next week. So maybe she will start to make that revelation. Only 2 more episodes left, by the way. So I have a feeling that we're not going to get a giant twist in the finale of this season. I think it's going to be mostly, creating this world and setting up the stakes for that second season. And I do think that that is going to be most of what we see there. And of course, we're also going to find out what happened to Manousos. Now, will Manousos be in the very next episode or only in the finale? I do hope they meet next week. By the way, we are in undiscovered country right now, episode starting next week, that the critics were able to see the first 7 episodes of the season. So they've seen up until now. But starting next week, it's all new to everybody else. To everyone, including the critics. Well, of course, there's been some intriguing covers at the end of each one of this show. Just to square that circle, this one is Age of Aquarius, of course. Okay, some trivia here. I, in general, have not listened to the Pluribus official podcast. And I assume a lot of you out there have listened to it. And I only listened to the very first one, and I listened to this week's. And in general, I mean, first of all, I don't listen to a lot of other people's podcasts on the shows I'm covering for a couple of reasons. One is I don't want to taint my opinion with their opinion. And second of all, mostly important is that I got into podcasting because I listened to a lot of podcasts. And there is something like having a conversation in your mind. I'm sure you're having this experience right now of listening to a podcast. So for me, hearing someone else talk about whatever I'm about to talk about kind of saps away my energy to do this. So in general, I don't listen to it. Although what I have listened to of the podcast, I have liked. But for anyone who hasn't listened to it, it's very much about the making of the show. And it doesn't talk about themes, which is primarily what oftentimes if I see a movie and then I want to listen to a podcast, it's to think about it, to like kind of dissect the themes and the intentionality of what's being said there. There's not a lot of that in the official Pluribus podcast. I'm sure there's other podcasts that do break those themes down, etc. But I was very curious to hear the official podcast, knowing that it's very much more about the production of the episodes, because I was really curious as to, this is a really, truly beautiful episode of TV. And I'm like, where did they shoot this? Did they actually drive through Argentina? Like, where did they shoot this footage? And shocked to find out that they shot most of this in New Mexico, in the Jaime's Pueblo. So it's very funny that some of what we see in his drive was actually shot at this Pueblo, which is the Pueblo right by the springs that Carol goes to. So the two actors are within, a very short distance of each other, theoretically, as they're shooting these scenes. But of course, in the world of the show, they are many thousands of miles apart. But it's the magic of movie making. Oh, and most importantly, of course, all those beautiful coastal driving scenes. I'm like, where is this? That boat full of cactuses? Like, cacti, I should say. But where is, what are we seeing here? It's actually the Canary Islands, which are absolutely stunning. If you've never been there, truly beautiful, and didn't even consider it. But then to imagine that, of course, this was shot in the Canary Islands, which is, and they mentioned this in that podcast, it's a microcontinent because it's an island on one side, but actually broke off from Africa on the other. So it has in like the rock formations of the interior of a continent, but then has this coastal island-like coastline as well, and allows them to shoot many different kinds of climates in a very concentrated location. So anyway, beautiful to look at. And some very funny things they mentioned about the production. For example, when Manousos collapses, he is collapsing in the Canary Islands, and then the shot of the helicopter coming down was shot in New Mexico. So it collapses in one continent, wakes up in another. And one last thing to bring up from that podcast that I thought was very interesting, because it touches on some of the themes that I picked up as I was watching this as well, is that the actor who plays Manousos mentions that Carol has all of the luxuries in the world, and yet she is empty. She has no hope because she is lonely, but also that she has given up on the world being different again. And alternately, Manousos has this purpose, is, repeating this mantra. It's as if he is in the meditative state, is willing to go through all this suffering because he has this hope. He has this belief that things will be different again. And that's just one of the dichotomies we're seeing there between Carol's perspective and his. And I do think that the whole show is setting this up intentionally to have Manousos, this isolated, diehard, steadfast, uncompromising figure, versus Carol, who is outraged by what's happened, but then doesn't want to kind of surrender her luxuries and accommodations, and what is going to happen when these two forces collide. And as far as speculating for the next episode, as I mentioned, I think Carol's back in the fold with the others. She's going to, as a matter of fact, the description, I'm looking at it right now, the description for next week's episode mentions that she will discover many new things that she didn't anticipate in this reconnection with Zosha, and via Zosha, the collective unconscious, the collective conscious, I should say. And what's going to happen when Manousos and Carol meet. Okay, one more thing to bring up is, as much as I enjoyed specifically breaking this down in this moment, I do think that there are audiences that are losing their patience with the show. And I think Gilligan, this is just his style. I almost quit on Breaking Bad, or did quit on Breaking Bad season 1, and then only came around to season 2 towards the end of its second season and liked it better than season 1. And of course, eventually, I think that Breaking Bad, from beginning to end, especially on a rewatch, is just a masterpiece and always very intentional and very intelligent in how it evolved its story. But I got to tell you, in the moment, I was skeptical. And same thing happened with Better Call Saul. I watched season 1 with my expectations based on Breaking Bad, and I thought it was going to be one thing, and I didn't get it. And I kind of fell off that show, and I didn't, engage with it immediately. I needed a little bit of time to, and then of course, as you heard my conversations with Sona here, discussing Better Call Saul at the end of its run, that the show, of course, completely hooked me in as well. And again, like at this point, I am just watching this show and trusting that even if I feel some of those frustrations in season 1 of the show, that it will all coalesce over time as the show matures, as we get more seasons, as the story continues to take shape. But I do wonder if the audience is maybe a little impatient, expecting things to be a little more moving more quickly and more overtly having more overt stakes, let's say. And I certainly think that that is happening, but still have that confidence personally that inevitably the show will evolve into something that what it wants to be. And this is all just setting that groundwork for the future. But I'm bought into this. I have doubted Gilligan before and been wrong every time. So I'm bought in. But I do wonder if people will be a little disappointed if something really big does not happen at the end of the season. And we're so close to the end of the season, I'm not sure we're going to get a really big event to tie things up. The good news is that they have started to write the new season of the show. The bad news is even if they start shooting it relatively soon, we probably won't see it until mid to late 2027. And that's what I have for you relating to this particular episode of the show. Hopefully we'll be back next week with a co-host to discuss the next episode, the penultimate episode of the season. And of course, check out Monday night. Expect an episode regarding the new Knives Out film, which I do recommend, and of course, easily available on Netflix. So check it out this weekend, and then you can hear Darren and I discuss it on Monday. And if you have been watching Welcome to Derry, we'll also be discussing the finale of that show. Probably pretty briefly, to be totally honest. We haven't been loving that show, but we have been following it. So we will give our opinion of where the season landed, but primarily be talking about the new Knives Out film. All right, everybody, thank you for listening. Have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you soon.